Welcome to the Western Bell podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled From Rigidity to Fluidity, the Art of Easeful and Even Elegant Transitions. The talk was given by Michael Menager and Mick Clarke on July 19th, 2025 via Zoom. Michael is a musician, singer, author, and modern-day troubadour whose third album is titled Line in the Water. Mick is a writer, practitioner of Vedic astrology, and mental health social worker. Both live in New South Wales, Australia. In this talk, they observe that we are continually in the process of transition, and that each transition is an invitation to awaken to possibility, to consciously go with life rather than resist it. They note that, to transform, we must understand that the way we conceive of ourselves and the world has to disappear in order for another reality to appear, and that there can be struggle in transition, but that there is also joy and love in letting go. Michael and Mick ask, what if we turn toward transition rather than away from it? The teachings of a variety of masters are referenced during the talk, including Yogananda, Dogen, Kalu Rinpoche, Papaji, Gurdjieff, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Arnaud Desjardins, Swami Prajnanpad, Yogi Ramsurat Kumar, and their own teacher, Lee Lozowick. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Mick Clarke speaks first, and then Michael Menager.
It's customary in Australia to acknowledge country before any public talk. So we honour the Gudungurra and the Darug Aboriginal people of the Blue Mountains, where I live, and the Yuin people of the New South Wales South Coast, where Michael lives. Their stories, songlines, and spirits continue to animate the sacred landscape here. So this topic arose from what we are experiencing in our own lives and from the mystery of what is yet to come in our world. The heart of transition is navigating liminal space, which is from the Greek word of threshold, referring to the space between. We're raising the possibility of using this in-between space as a chamber of practice, as a crucible, and offering an entry point into reality, a portal into a deeper relationship with oneself and the world, and with the divine. So this is the sweet heart of transition. Here we find ourselves inside change, inside a crossing over place, where there may be alchemical possibility for us to allow and embody a different way of being in the world. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Sydney Opera House to see a performance by the Bangarra Dance Theatre. It's Australia's premier Indigenous dance theatre, for a show called Illume, a beautiful show about light as an expression of Aboriginal spiritual and cultural life in the Kimberley. So before the show, I was with a group of friends in the theatre foyer who were discussing Bertie, the massive seal who'd taken up residence on the VIP north steps of the house, so right on the harbour. And a tourist seeking Insta-fame had jumped a barricade, which did not please Bertie, and he then had to dive into the cold water of the harbour to escape the wrath of the sun-drunk seal. So meanwhile, the pre-theatre bells or chimes are sounding loudly and repeatedly, announcing 5 minutes to the start of the show. And I'm noticing my internal agitation rising quickly. And with Bertie captivating everyone, my inner agitation transforms into irritability and impatience. We made it to our seats just in time, but I felt quietly shocked and embarrassed by how I lost my composure in this most simple of transitions. Everyone I learnt later were totally cool with it all and planning to arrive exactly on time. My teacher, Lee, would recommend as a condition of practice always arriving 10 minutes early to any appointment, to transition into the next space, to arrive relaxed and awake. So not like how I arrived to this show. There are important reasons for this. By expressing discipline around our time and space commitments, we serve the other. We express respect and sensitivity to the environment and can bring our best selves into the new space. I learnt from many years of community work, it's important to turn up for appointments when I say I will, to be reliable. So this creates integrity and trust. To use the language of the forum, if who I am is what I say, then showing up on time when I say I will means I'm a trustworthy person, a man of integrity, so I can walk across that threshold feeling ready to fully meet what lies beyond. We are embodied beings moving through time and space, and our fleeting lives revolve around the passage of transitions and the continual change they bring to us. Now, these transition spaces may be physical, psychological, or spiritual. Daily, we experience sunrise and sunset, sleeping, waking, seasons and passages, doors opening and closing. And on this continuum, of course, there are ever larger moments of transition, change and transformation, moving to a new job, departing on a journey, a new relationship begins, or meeting a new life, taking birth, or bearing witness to a beloved one's death. Each transition is an invitation to remember, to bring attention into the space, to awaken to possibility, to navigate change with a softness and presence of mind. A surrendered self is open to receive the blessings these moments offer us. We can all recount moments of failed transitions when all elegance and attention was lost to the dictates of ego, to the machinery of mind. When I first approached Lee, a student described him to me as a master of space. Now, I wondered what that meant. And then over a few years, I observed him being utterly fluid and relaxed. He could respond so authentically and often so outrageously in the moment without the usual filters of ego or neurosis. I loved this conception of a relational field attention that brings awareness into each space or chamber we enter, always looking to bring gentleness into any space. I remember this every day, to bring gentleness into every space. In the Vedic tradition, there's a Sanskrit term called tirtha, and this represents a place of transition, crossing from ordinary space to sacred space. And in India, a tirtha is known as a passage, a ford, a way, a crossing over place, and it's related to a body of water or a place of pilgrimage. It's a place of transition, evoking sacred space, a place where we might see through the worlds, where mystery, the naked, wild radiance and beauty of life takes hold of us in this space between the known and the unknown. Tirthas are felt at energetic crossing over points. So consider hospitals, airports, temples, churches. I've encountered tirthas in unlikely places like inside a police station cell, in the back of an ambulance, a retreat centre, a beach, or even a garden. Every door we walk through has sacred possibility. So what if these transitions represent sacred frontiers where we may be reconfigured by bringing awareness to this passage, and in doing so are remade and bring light into the world? What if we turned towards transitions rather than away to meet them as lawful expressions of being human? In the tantric tradition of the bowels, everything in the universe is food. You just have to figure out how to use it. Who would have thought that moving through transitional space was a matter of life and death? So, how to bring presence and awareness to these moments, which sometimes are so painful, marked in space and time, to surrender our rigidity and contraction. Ellen Bass, in her poem, If You Knew, says, "How wide does the crack in heaven have to split? What would people have to look like if we could see them as they are, soaked in honey, stung and swollen, reckless, pinned against time? How do we transition through a collapsing world. Meg Wheatley interviewed on the Wild podcast recently describing the meta crisis, or the multi-system collapse we are experiencing now, said, "When people ask what's going to happen, I say they're asking the wrong question. The question is, who do we choose to be? Is there a price to this? A sacrifice to surrender the drama of unceasing transition shock, which we experience in our personal life, and now increasingly collectively as the atmosphere fills with water or fire and intense change and chaos becomes normalized?" Gurdjieff in The Fourth Way work says it clearly. It's difficult to accept the idea of having both an objective life and at the same time a personal life. That is, to be subjective, to let oneself live a personal life. It's even more difficult to accept that we have to pay with our personal life. Everything I wish for has to be paid for. If I wish to have a new state, I must sacrifice the old. We never get more than what we give up. What we receive is proportional to what we sacrifice. How to transition, to use a musical and fourth way metaphor that moves us into a new octave. How does a spiritual practice build capacity to yield, to open and accept, to be with what is, as it is here and now? Ikkyu the Zen monk says, "The vast flood rolls onward, but yield yourself and it floats you upon it." In the yoga tradition, Savasana, or corpse pose, is the final pose of the yoga class, where we lie on our back and relax and practice dying for 10 minutes. Pattabhi Jois, a renowned Indian yoga master, described Shavasana as the most difficult yoga pose. So this transition from doing to being. My yoga teacher encourages us to surrender our vigilance during Shavasana, to surrender the effort we have made and let go of the breath and the body, to rest. So there's a deep letting go in this space of openness. If you have trauma in your body, you'll notice there's a lot of holding in the breath. We have to remember to breathe. It's the key to anchoring during transitions. Resistance causes the breath to be shorter and tighter. So I remember to take long, deep breaths like golden wheat slowly waving in the breeze. Once my breath and body settles, this pose loosens my molecules for a few moments at least. And sometimes it's a sweet peek into allowing transition move over and into my bones, into groundlessness. Practicing this transition after asana is helpful. So when I get back up again, there's a little less clinging. And if you can look at it every day, it's not a practice of dying, it's a practice of living. There's this moment-to-moment experience. I found here that it's in the giving up, or in this sacrifice is where the joyfulness emerges. So breaking it down into slow, the transition is moving from contraction and suffering, grief, loss, to letting go into freedom, changing. Chogyam Trungpa's words from the Vajrayana world take me here directly. The tantric expression of justice inspires me to enter practice ever more deeply, which is none other than being in my life as authentically as possible. Trungpa says, "Since all things are clear and free from obscurations, there's nothing to attain or realize. The everyday practice is simply to develop a complete acceptance and openness to all situations and emotions, and all people, experiencing everything without reservations or blockages, so that one never withdraws or centralizes onto oneself." The space between. Transition speaks to change, transformative states, the liquid spaces of meltdown, the opening of a flower, the setting of a sun. And then, of course, there's the capital T transition that we are all approaching. At the moment of death, what's going to happen to the movie of me? In the wonderful Indian epic, the Mahabharata, the sage Yudhishthira is asked, of all things in life, what is most amazing? And Yudhishthira answers that a man or woman, seeing others die all around him, never thinks that he will die. Papaji loved to speak of the transit lounge, and he would giggle and chuckle and say how we are all waiting for our planes to take off. And yet we become so attached and holding on and resisting and struggling with every breath. Tonight I had a fire in my backyard as the white cockatoos screeched and soared overhead between the trees, joyfully returning to nest in the valley, which they do every day at sunset here. The sky blazed pink and gold as the fire sang and popped, while a Shiva moon sparkled through the eucalypts. And suddenly the intensity and beauty of the day faded into night, and a late storm swept heavy rain roaring in across the mountains. Kalu Rinpoche said, before we know it, our life is finished and it is time to die. If we lack the foundation of a stable practice, we go to death helplessly, into fear and anguish. From Yogananda, death is only an experience through which you are meant to learn a great lesson. You cannot die. From Dogen, 450 years I've hung the sky with stars, and now I leap through. What shattering! So consider this as only the ongoing process of life, changing moment to moment, day to day, of transition. The world of perpetual change is one of suffering and sorrow, but also it's one of radiant joy and freedom. With the certainty of transitions, there's only the light of awareness and love that we inhabit. Through this form, this mystery of embodiment, there's only being present to an unceasing flow of transformation. And while the personal self is inherently unstable and must wrestle with transition, all the while the impersonal transcendental self lives outside of time in silence. In the Bao tradition, enlightened duality is an embrace of reality as it is, an embrace of change, a rise to reveal the ceaseless revelation of divine grace. I'm very appreciative for my relationship to practice and Sangha that has supported me to move through the inevitable changes and sufferings of this life. As Mr. Bowie says, time may change you, but you can't change time. Over to you, Michael.
Okay. Would anybody like to respond?
I was struck by the practice of turning toward transitions.
I'm thinking about acceptance. Acceptance was mentioned. And if there were full acceptance, I don't know that there would be transition.
Can you say a little more about what you mean by full acceptance?
Like complete openness.
So you're saying if that were present, transition wouldn't happen?
Perhaps.
Everything would be transition, and so maybe nothing would be transition.
I think it's interesting to have the sense of being a victim to something greater, how it can be the reminder of surrender.
Michael and I have had several discussions about this. Yeah, so many different dimensions to this. There seems to be suffering and struggle, but also a joy and love and letting go. And they're not mutually exclusive. It's all inherent in navigating change and transition. But we're just so conditioned to resist and struggle, and hence the suffering we experience as we move through all these changes. So it's not one or the other. I think it's kind of both.
Hello, everyone. And great listening to the feedback. And I felt like for a minute there, I was transitioning into a new way of looking at the topic, which is good, Mick began his part of our presentation today by acknowledging, in effect, that despite the years that have passed since the occupation and colonization of Australia in the late 1700s, this country has always been and will always be Aboriginal land. Never been a treaty here. Imbued and sustained by Indigenous Australians and their respected elders from the distant past up to the present day. I thank them for their ongoing custodianship of the land from which I speak to you today. Another kind of acknowledgement I'd like to make involves the opportunity that this podcast presents to do some work with my good friend and Sangha mate, Mick Clarke, as part of our shared spiritual path. Both Mick and I are students of Western Bowel Master Lee Lozowick. And one thing about our teacher while he was in the body is that he had the habit of tossing out potential work projects as if they were footballs for someone to pick up and run down the field with. So I'd just like to confirm that Mick and I both hold this opportunity to speak and to share today, just as if we've caught one of those footballs and have decided to take a chance and see how far we can get toward the goal line with it. And by the way, we take full responsibility for any errors, deletions, or inaccurate substitutions that we might make along the way. Our intention is to start a conversation and perhaps encourage an inquiry concerning a subject that we feel is worthy of our time and attention. We're not experts, we're seekers, just as I suppose many of you who are listening just now. So speaking of Lee and his footballs, I heard him mention the name of Arnaud Desjardins, a French spiritual teacher who died in 2011 on many occasions and in many different contexts over the years. And I also read numerous accounts of their meetings together. Some fuses burn quickly, others more slowly. But over time, Arnaud's teaching and the insights he gained from his own teacher, Swami Prajnanpad, have filtered down to me via a number of sources. For anyone listening who might be interested, there's one of Arnaud's books I'd highly recommend. Not What Should Be, But What Is, published by Home Press, 2021. It's a collection of what Arnaud calls the formulas of Swami Prajnanpad, with commentary by Arnaud himself. I've been carrying this book around with me for a couple of years now, and I would call it incredibly useful. Anyway, about a month and a half ago, I returned from an overseas trip that took me to, among other places, the Poitiers region of West Central France. There, some of my friends, the people I was staying with, introduced me to a student of Arnaud Desjardins named Gilles Facet, who for some years has been working in France with students of his own. My initial connection with Gilles was musical. Amongst his other attributes, he's a rock guitar player, and he stood in with me during a concert that my friends who live on a farm had organized in their substantially sized barn, on a stacked up pile of hay bales, in fact. That was the stage. And resulting from this contact with Gilles and other contacts I was having at the same time with some of his students, I became impressed by his approach to life as both an inquiry and an adventure, very much in the spirit of his own teacher, Arnaud Desjardins. Here's a short segment from the book I've mentioned dealing with how Arnaud visualized progress along the spiritual path. Part of his commentary on the following, what he called formula, one of the formulas of Swami Prajnanpad. Here's the formula. It is not a joke. You will have to pay the full price. No master ever promised that the path would be dotted with daisies. All have said that there are trials to be faced, moments of death to oneself, when one doesn't recognize themselves anymore. But regarding the path, very few spiritual seekers are disposed to accept that they are going toward a lot of trials and crises in the etymological sense of that word, i.e., an inner overturning, such that things will never again be what they are. That's the etymological origin of crisis. Wings do not grow on the back of caterpillars. If you want transformation, you will have to go through a stage that corresponds to the chrysalis stage in the insect world. Winning without losing anything is a vain and illusory hope of ego. Arnaud's words here echo those of George Gurdjieff that Mick quoted earlier. We never get more than we give up. what we receive is proportional to what we sacrifice. Both Gurdjieff and Arnaud establish that sacrifice plays a role in the process that we could also call transition. In any case, getting back to Gilles, given his strong ground on Arnaud's teaching, I thought he might be somebody pretty well placed to provide an answer to a simple yet far-reaching question I had related to the podcast that I was about to do. Namely, what would you consider to be the elements that a person might consider when faced with making any kind of transition? Gilles very kindly got back to me on this in a simple, clean, comprehensive sort of way. So what I'll do now is to present you with some of Gilles' observations in answer to my question, which will hopefully provide useful as a framework for a more general discussion. Here's the first of Gilles' thoughts on the subject. This world is constant change, and whether we are aware of it or not, we are continually in the process of preparing for a transition, making it, digesting it, preparing for the next. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the saying, when you've got a hammer in your hand, everything starts to look like a nail. You know that one? You begin to look at your life and life in general in terms of transitions, and suddenly you see them everywhere. In fact, a fair question would be, where is transition not? Yet, despite this overriding evidence, perhaps due to the essential instability of the I, the ego, we wrestle with transition. We try to get the best of it. We try to ward off the discomfort that change brings with it. Yet discomfort grows inside of us the longer we avoid or delay or circumvent. Chogyam Trungpa offers some deceptively simple advice in this regard. We're always in transition. If you can just relax with that, you'll have no problem. A simple, straightforward concept, relax within the process of transition. But what if the transition is a crisis situation, such as Arnaud describes, an overturning, such that things will never be the same again? On a personal level, that's already a lot. But what about an outer overturning in the structures of the world as we have known it up to now, where so many aspects, politically, climatically, seem to be moving in a direction of no return? To relax in the middle of an overturning? To be the one who's smiling and not screaming, going down the steepest part of the roller coaster ride? It's a tall order for many of us. Anyway, here's more from Gilles Farcet. I believe that any transition, major or minor, should be as conscious as possible. It is important to see it coming, just as one looks at the sky and knows that the weather is about to turn. I do not mean trying to control it, but rather being able to consciously go along with it instead of resisting it. While in France, I spent some time with another student of Arnaud Desjardins, my good friend Pascal Carreau, invited me to come and stay with him and his partner for a while in central Paris. At one point during our visit, he was telling me about the time he felt was his proudest moment with his teacher, Arnaud, the time that he felt he'd received the highest possible compliment from his teacher. And what Arnaud had said, looking at Pascal in the midst of conversing with some of his other students, is this. He said, "This fellow, I believe, has the potential to be one with." Be one with. That phrase has really stuck with me. Not just observing, certainly not resisting, but rather joining in, becoming a part of. A little bit more from Arnaud on this subject. Our greatness, our dignity, our hope is this capacity we have to totally agree with the moment, with no slight difference, even when we find ourselves in apparently not easy to accept circumstances. Brings to mind one of my favorite Zen sayings, which is, the great way is not difficult for he who has no preferences. When I reflect back upon my recent trip to Europe and the UK, it occurs to me that the whole thing was one big opportunity to practice. And by this, I mean test out my meditation, my ability or the lack thereof to find my center within the context of transition. I've not traveled extensively since 2019. My usual habitat is bushland and countryside, dirt roads where you go slow because kangaroos might hop out in front of you. And once I've driven over the creek crossing and up the hill to my place where I live alone, I might not see another human being for days until I drive out again. Contrast this to standing at the top of 3 long flights of stairs descending into the Paris metro from a bustling street corner in the middle of town. The wheels on my 15-kilogram roller bag won't help me now. So with that by the handle in one hand and a guitar case in the other and a courier bag slung over my shoulder, there I am, right on the edge of a transition. In Gilles Farcet's language, the weather is about to turn, and there is no resisting or avoiding it. My next destination lies through here. So what do I think about in this moment? Only this: all that counts right now, as long as it takes, with no distraction, is to keep my eyes and all of my intention on those concrete steps and on my feet. 1 foot down, bearing solidly on the step, balancing the weight, taking the next step with the other foot with exactly the same precision. A fall under these circumstances would be unthinkable. I'm not a young man. My leg muscles and knees are somewhat worn, but still serviceable, as long as they're driven more like tractors and racing cars, in low gear and staying grounded. Here's a general statement from Arnaud Desjardins concerning situations in which it's clear to us that we must transform and must transition, that there is no choice. The one who wants to transform has to understand well that their present form, the way they feel themselves being, the way they conceive of themselves and the world around them, will have to disappear before another reality may appear. Transitions call for new skills, new ways of seeing and acting, different perhaps than the ones that have got us up to this point. One way of being disappears, and another way of being, perhaps more useful in the current circumstances, steps in and takes its place. Gilles Farcet set down quite a number of considerations in answer to my question, more than I have time to present you with today. But I'll finish up the Gilles portion of this talk anyway with just one more thought, a sort of summary statement from him. So here's Gilles. So transition to me feels like obedience, following the plan as gracefully as possible, serving it, being a conscious pawn in the game of higher forces. I really love that, being a conscious pawn in the game of higher forces. Maybe you don't even understand the game. You don't know what the game is. In that perspective, transition, though it imposes itself, should, if possible, not be rushed, but quietly considered, consciously planned and actioned. Like a good servant who doesn't run around doing his master's orders, but executes them with dignity and care. Chogyam Trungpa also addresses this notion of not rushing for the exits or for the big breakthrough in making a transition, but rather taking one's time, getting to know the territory and the ground along the way. He says, wherever you are, befriend the cage you're in. Get to know it. So yes, the cage is always a starting point, where you are just now. Why not give it some attention? Why not see what's there, whether you're moving through or not? Okay, I'm just going to seek over to a bit of something from my own experience working around my area and a little bit of a concept that came up out of the experience I had in that job. For a decade, I worked as a member of a mobile mental health team in my area, set up by the Division of General Practice to provide counseling services to the patients of our overworked country doctors. I traveled to medical practices, community health centers, and hospitals up and down the far south coast of New South Wales, where I live, and up into the central tablelands. Over 10 years, I heard lots of stories from people in various stages of transition. A common image I took away from hearing those stories is what I've come to refer to as the gap. A place you're at where the shoreline that you've left is behind you, no more to be seen, unreachable, and where the shore that you are heading for still seems far away and shrouded in mist and uncertainty. It's a nowhere place for many people, a place to dread and or try to escape from by various means, distractions, self-anesthesia, what have you. The dead opposite, in fact, of Trungpa's advice to befriend one's cage. So there's a lot of work that's been indicated so far here in terms of relaxing in the midst of crisis, befriending one's cage, the sacrifices that must be made of a habitual way of looking at the world, of old habits and whatnot. And one of the precepts of Swami Prajnanpad that Arno comments on is that this way, we don't want to pump ourselves up. This way is for heroes. It's for the hero. And so he gives some words of encouragement in his book that I've been talking about, not how I want things to be, but how things are. That's a paraphrase of the title. Okay, this is some encouragement. Of course, a part of you is afraid, but there's another part of you, the night, that he spells with a K, which is compelled in your depths by this necessity. I cannot not go on to this path. If that is the case, don't go half measure. Go fully ahead with courage. Go ahead as a hero. Engage yourself into these unknown lands of consciousness in which you do not recognize or understand yourself anymore, and keep going further. Okay, I think I'll end there. Thank you all for listening, and any feedback, questions that may come, welcome.
Michael, that just reminded me of this idea, the pain paradox, which is this idea that when we meet struggle or difficulty, we react and we push it away and we respond with anxiety or struggle, and that increases our suffering and decreases our awareness. But again, coming back to this idea of turning towards it, or what Trungpa talked about, when you're in hell, you just stay there, that turning toward. And in the turning toward, it decreases suffering and increases awareness. I find that it's like a very counterintuitive thing, and Trungpa really nails it there. And I think that's very relevant to the notion of transition, right? So in the turning towards or into the change in a relaxed way, there's a lot less suffering than there would be if we resist and struggle with it.
Mm-hmm. It's useful to consider, if we're in a transition and all that, the inevitability of it. Consider that it's inevitable. And so how would you be then? I'm a great admirer of Leonard Cohen, especially the final part of his career. He said once, people talk about this catastrophe that's coming, this great catastrophe that's going to befall us. People talk about this. And he said, I got news for you. The catastrophe has arrived. It's already here. And the only question we should be asking ourselves is, what is the proper conduct during a catastrophe?
You'll often hear there's only the present moment, which is true. So when it's fully present, transition can't be, right?
So are you saying it's kind of an either or?
I don't know. It's like if you're in the moment.
Yeah, if you're in the moment, if you're totally in the moment, how can the transition? Mick, take that one.
You have your hand up there?
Well, I was going to speak about something else, but it occurs to me that if you're in the moment, you're in the moment of transition. You're present in the moment to the fact that you are unstable or confused or in darkness or whatever. I don't think it means that you've risen above it or that you've completely lost touch with the reality around you. So, yeah, to just be with what is in the present moment is to be in the insecurity and uncertainty and perhaps glorious celebration of transition. That's my thought. But I was going to bring up the notion of time. So I see friends who fall down and break an arm. And when you're 70 years old, it takes a lot longer for a broken arm to heal than it does when you were 20. And what I find is that for me, it takes twice as long as you want it to be or think it should be, or even the doctor tells you how it's going to be. So I have to really give myself a huge amount of space when I recognize that I'm in a transition. So, I wanted to add that to the conversation about the spaciousness that's necessary and the elimination of this having to fix it right now, to be in that no man's land or no person's land that you described between what's behind you and what's ahead of you takes usually twice as long, if not more, than what you think it should be, or even what people are telling you. Oh, you've only lost your partner 5 years ago. You should be out of it by now.
Yes, the stages of grief are exactly like this. Yeah.
Ask not of what this transition can do for me, but what can I do for this transition? Like, what if we turned it around and actually gave ourselves into something?
What are we actually sacrificing? It's our self-reference and our clinging and our resistance and struggle. That idea of bringing spaciousness to change and opening and requires us to put down some of our resistance, make space for that.
One of the words that comes up is commitment. Are you prepared to commit yourself to something or not? You've probably heard this, the difference between involvement and commitment. For those of you who haven't heard this, so it's like a plate of bacon and eggs, okay? Involvement and commitment. The chicken's involved and the pig's committed. So, I would say if you're on the road of transition, you are committed. You're the pig on the plate. Are you willing to do that or not?
I think of transitions, it has to do with outer circumstances, and outer circumstances just happen. So, of course, there are transitions. We go from one breath to the next. That's a transition. But our internal state is what you two are talking about: surrendering, accepting, going with, and being present. We can be present in each moment, but the moment is always transitioning. And when you were talking about the gap, I was thinking about the Hopi elders, how they describe these times. And they talk about us being in this great river and to go right into the river, surrender to the river. But not everyone's going to be able to do that. Some are going to resist what is, and they're clinging to the sides. And there's great danger in doing that. But the ones that are, I guess, committed and going in the flow of this great river, they talk about the importance of looking around and seeing who else is there with you. And that brings comfort. We're all in the center of this fast moving river of time and these amazing challenges, but the comfort of look around, see who else is there. We're all moving. And we don't know where we're going. We've left the bank behind and we can't see what's ahead. And that's how life is, always.
This speaks to a point that I wanted to also include in my presentation. You've said it. Where's the joy? There is joy, and you've described one aspect of it. The joy is in comradeship, companionship. Maybe some of you have done ceremonial sweat lodges in the past. I've done some down here on the coast some years ago. There was a pipe-carrying guy that we all knew, and once in a while we'd get together and do a lodge, and it was pretty intense. But what I remember about it most of all was just when you're thinking, I got to get out of here. I'm going to fry. I can't breathe. Your friends are around you and everybody's praying together. And it's so wonderful. It's so wonderful. And that's a little bit of a metaphor, I suppose, to what you've been talking about.
The beauty of Sangha and community and forums like this, that we can be together and remember that we are all moving down this great river together and we need each other.
I'm thinking about how if you're in the present moment, maybe there's no transition. There's just the present moment. And thinking about it is not the same as embodying it. But coming back to the teaching and remembering when I have this reaction to transitions, this is inevitable and that all life has changed. And then I can work with that. Really, everything else is hopeless, it seems to me. I mean, we all come to practice with this in our own very personal ways, I think.
For some reason, I keep thinking of that example with the headache and you don't know when it went away. Like all of a sudden you don't have the headache and you have no idea when that happened.
I think when we say yes to life, which is sort of what I feel like we're saying, there's such a wide range of experience to that. I think we often want to make it simple, like, oh, it looks like this. But I think saying yes to life is courageous and powerful and present and engaged. And it's an incredible foot in to the path. So our ability to say yes, I think the mind wants to have the equation and apply it to everything. But it can look like so many different things. It can look like saying no to something.
Again, Arnaud Desjardins, one of his things he said, if your no is not strong, your yes cannot be strong either.
Are you in the midst of a particular transition right now?
I feel like I am. Just after a couple of weeks on the road, something sort of clicked in. I'm still putting the pieces together and unpacking the bags. I took in a lot and I had a lot of impressions, especially how I could be in the world in a slightly different way that might be in line with my stage of life and what I have to offer. Stuff like that.
Well, my guess is that you're digesting now. You will create art as a result of this transition, as my guess. I think that's what we do as artists, yeah, in all different ways.
I've been writing and considering writing, and not just songs either. So, yeah, we'll see.
Art seems to be a way of dealing with transitions, of working with them, poetry and writing and music. To just start writing and see what comes out sometimes is really surprising. And it causes me to reflect on a deeper level of the transition that's taking place in my life that I might not even be that much in touch with.
Mm-hmm. I think the ability to articulate what is going on in the midst, or even what I sense might be going on in the transition, is really valuable. I travel or I do a lot of experiences and I'm so involved in it that it's not until I can get home that I can let that settle. But if I don't try to articulate it, it's just one more been there, done that.
My experience has been that when I have written something about it or articulated it in some way, it's easier to let it go.
It also can integrate it. So that's a way of integrating too. Letting go, yes?
Yeah, same difference. Once it's integrated, then you can go on.
Yeah.
And all these things, like you were, I think, beginning to say, is words. Words don't do any of this justice. But they point in a direction. I think that can be useful.
Yeah, there's the saying that goes something like, words fail me or words fail us. I don't think words ever fail us. But if we can't exactly find the word, then we got to go a bit further. We got to go further into that experience, whatever it was, to be able to articulate it.
Are there any songs that you have written, thinking of your last album, Line in the Water?
Songs that I've written about the topic of
transitions and integrating them.
Transition. Well, I was thinking about that today. One of the songs that comes to mind is from my second album, which is entitled Not the Express. There are two quasi-autobiographical songs on that album. One of them is called Unfamiliar Place. It's about being in that place where somebody pulls the rug out from under you, or a track door opens, and suddenly you're somewhere else. And all the things that you used to rely on and depend on are gone. I think that song addresses that state. The other one is another topic of ours that we've talked about, how things take time. Transitions take time. And especially as we get older, you notice that things go a little more slowly. You heal more slowly, and you unwind the body in the morning a bit more slowly, stuff like that. And it's called Not the Express. It's the title track. So I talk about a train, an old train that just kind of lopes along, doing its best. The engine's well worn, but if you give it a little bit of slack, it can still go. And that's also about me and about this life of transition. It's not the express. I'm not on the express. I'm going to stop at funny destinations. I'm going to have a look around. That old hobo by the side of the track. There's old train graveyards. The trains will finally go to the graveyard. Something will rust out or something will fail. But for now, I can see the tracks ahead of me. The lights are working. And I'm going at my own chosen speed, or at the speed I need to go. So those are two songs coming right off the bat for me on the topic. Thanks for asking.
Mick, you're constantly dealing with people in the midst of pretty extreme transitional situations.
Yeah, I use a lot of metaphors with people, like what you're in is a passing storm, and offering people some possibility, seeking some patience or space for this storm. And sometimes it may only be holding on for the next hour, creating a space for transition to occur. I mean, I'm very much in the cauldron, dealing with a lot of turbulence and crisis, and to find some space to allow what can feel very contracted and tight and stormy to change form. I think that can be useful because, as we all know, it's not as solid as we feel it is, whether it's an emotional state or a life state. I return a lot to those kind of metaphors around storm. Where I live, we get these quite intense mountain storms of thunder and lightning, which come down really intensely. But an hour later, they're gone, and we find ourselves in a very different place. So finding some spaciousness, sometimes if it's just hanging on to the next minute or the next hour, it's offering encouragement that things inevitably will change. And even the places where we feel there's so much suffering, that's going to change too, if we're able to be with it and to sit with it. Easier said than done.
I find the Buddhist idea of impermanence very helpful in life, and especially with transitions. And just what you were talking about, that when difficult transitions are happening and we tend to tighten and resist the movement of life, then it's just helpful to remind ourselves this too shall pass. I mean, it always does. Everything passes, especially our moods and our resistance. Those are for the difficult things, but even for the positive things, not to cling to them. It's like, well, this too is going to pass. This thing that I love, everything passes. And it's just helpful to keep me in reality, the reality of constant change.
It's like the only certainty is uncertainty and change.
Right.
I used to play with this guy who's a real professional musician, very experienced, and is in a number of bands. And anyway, he played in my trio for a while, and we had this one just amazing gig. I was nearly overcome. We played so well, everything went so well. And I went up to him to share a little bit, and he was packing up his instruments, getting ready to go to another gig. And he just kind of said, "See you later," like he'd been through the same experience as me. And I was a little bit brokenhearted. But this guy knew how to transition. He was totally present with the music, played just great. And then next gig. Took me a while to get over that.
Yes, we want to cling, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that was a better transition than yours. I prefer yours.
You could say his name's Sam. This guy's Sam. Sam probably helped me in a way, making my own necessary transition, which was, hey, I've got a next gig too. It's not in 10 minutes though, but I better pack up my guitar and make sure all the pieces are there. And I could just sit with all that we experienced together in my heart. It wouldn't mean that it necessarily go away, but I was in another moment then. And he made it clear that we were in another moment. Like that moment we had on stage together where we were kind of blissfully, you know what I mean, was over. that was a little shocking to me. Whereas for me, I would have preferred to dwell in it for a while and bask and say, wasn't that great? And that solo you did, that was just so good. And the way we changed up there and, like that. But there wasn't that opportunity.
How do you work with that? Do you try to stop it? Do you let it run? Do you observe it?
I have to say that probably in that moment, I just let Sam be a little bit like a teacher, like, well, this is what's happening now. We've had this thing that was yesterday, that moment, 3 seconds ago. And now we've done it. Nothing more need be said. Pack up the instruments. Got to get to the next gig. See you later. Okay. So then I started packing up my instruments and started talking to the sound man and started being in the cage I was in, so to speak. I don't know.
We have a Hindu monastery here where I live, and I heard that their practice is not to speak of themselves more than 5 days in the past or more than 5 days into the future. It's like, to me, a great teaching, learning how to keep moving, just keep moving, looking forward.
Yes, indeed.
I was thinking about how in a big culture, there are a lot of individuals who think that nothing ever changes in their lives, that they are stuck and bored and feel like they're running the same rat race all day long. It's not an uncommon reaction of people. The world circumstances could be changing, but for themselves, they have the sense that nothing is changing. It's hard to relate to because I'm not in that place usually. But the thought that came to my mind is that nature is a great teacher, even if it's just sitting outside and having my cup of tea as the sun rises, to begin to explore that everything is changing in such a magnificent way. But I do know that a lot of people just are stuck and nothing changes.
And sometimes those people who feel stuck, that's when they start therapy because they know they're stuck and it doesn't feel good.
That's a very good definition of depression. It's stuck energy. How do we keep moving, be fluid and relaxed and move through our days with elegance?
Yes, that was part of your title. From rigidity to fluidity, the art of easeful and even elegant transition.
I think we're enculturated to react and resist and struggle, which causes just so many compounding problems for us. But for me, this idea of elegance is the sense of openness and trying to be relaxed around the flow of our lives. For me, that's really the core of my practice, being relaxed and open with whatever's in front of me, trying not to fight or resist it too much.
I'd say that whatever we practice, we get good at, right? That's the general rule. When I first start doing the piece of music, it's pretty clunky and pretty slow and have to slow things down and da-da-da. But if I keep doing that over a period of years, and I am talking years here, the execution of it does achieve a certain elegance. So take a basic concept and keep on strumming, keep on sounding that note.
So I teach kindergartners, and probably 50% of my classroom has to do with transitions, to get from A to B, to get them to put their work away, things like that. In the beginning of the school year, we practice that over and over and over again. This first 6 weeks, forget about doing a lesson. It's all about transitions. And the kids, they don't have the ideas or tools or practices that we are talking about, accepting what is as it is or relaxing through a transition. They don't know anything about this. So they're quite anxious when it comes to transitions. So a lot of my time is preparing them, talking to them about what is coming ahead. But then what I realize, what makes the transitions the easiest for them is that at one point they develop trust in me. They know that I'm kind and I get them from A to B safely, and it's supposed to be that way. And when they get to B, there's going to be something great. For example, going out to the playground or going to the garden at our school. And having that faith and trust in a teacher is a big part for me, weathering transitions. And I've had to weather quite a few transitions, difficult transitions in my life. And a friend of mine kept telling me about Arnaud and accept what is as it is. It was so hard. No, I don't want to. Or how can you even say that? But what really got me through most of those difficult transitions is faith, chanting Yogaram Surat Kumar's name and having faith. And that for me is a really big practice. It's just having faith and chanting and breathing with it. It'll help me greatly through a transition, as difficult as it may be. So that's something that I thought of, how to weather a transition. For me, a big part of that is having faith in my lineage and trust that in the end, it will all work out. It will be okay. It may not be exactly how I wished it to be, but it will still be okay. And I will be okay with whatever that end result is. I can live with that.
Any last comments before we end for the evening?
I think we could transition now. What do you think, Mick?
I think we could. Thank you, everyone, for coming and for contributing.
Yes. Thank you.